Hi everyone, my name is Laura Trump. Today, I want to share a personal story about dealing with toxic people, especially my manipulative mother-in-law, and how her actions almost ruined my marriage. Thankfully, karma stepped in and turned things around. 5 years ago, I felt like I had everything I could want. I had a successful career as a marketing executive, a modern apartment in downtown Olympia, and a marriage I believed was perfect. My home was my safe space, especially my home office where I could focus and work without interruptions, or so I thought. But then came the regular interruptions. My mother-in-law, Julie, had a habit of making her presence felt, especially during our weekly family dinners. One evening, as I was catching up on work, she commented with her usual sugar-coated criticism. "Laura, darling, shouldn't you be cooking dinner instead of staring at that screen all day?" I took a deep breath and responded with a polite smile. "Actually, Julie, I just landed a big client today, which will increase our company's revenue by 60%. But she didn't miss a beat. "In my day," she said in that overly sweet tone, "women focused on family first, not chasing careers. Don't you think so, Scott?" Scott, my husband, kept his eyes down on his plate. He muttered, "Mom, Lara's work is important to her. She's really good at it." Julie wasn't satisfied. "Of course, dear. I just worry about your future. When will I get grandchildren? Laura is always working." These dinners were emotionally draining. Every week, Julie criticized my choices, my cooking, my career, even my priorities. She always wrapped her words in a fake kindness that made it hard to call her out. Things got worse when Scott received a big promotion at his software company. I was genuinely happy for him, but Julie found a way to twist the moment into her advantage. During dinner, she announced, "Oh, my precious boy, this is such exciting news. I'll move in temporarily to help you both adjust to this new phase." I nearly dropped my fork. "That's really not necessary, Julie. We're doing fine on our own." She ignored me completely. "Nonsense. My doctor says my blood pressure is too high. I'll feel much better being close to my son during this time." Scott looked worried. "Mom, are you sure you're okay?" he asked. That's when it hit me. Her health problems always seemed to show up whenever she wanted something. Later that night, I realized Julie's behavior wasn't random. It was part of a pattern of manipulation. Her health scares, sweetly worded insults, and constant meddling were all ways to control us. It was exhausting, and I knew I couldn't let it continue. This was just the beginning of my journey to set boundaries, reclaim my space, and protect my marriage. I'll share how I handled it and the lessons I learned along the way in the next part of my story. I decided it was time to confront Scott. "Honey," I said, trying to stay calm, "your mother can't move in. This is our home, our space." Scott sighed. "It's just temporary, Laura. She hasn't been feeling well. Didn't you see how pale she looked the other day?" "She looked perfectly fine when she was criticizing my career choices," I shot back. Scott frowned. "You're being unfair. She's old school, Laura. She's just worried about us." I didn't argue further, but something about the situation felt off. The next week, I overheard Julie talking on the phone while she was out in the garden. Her tone was cheerful, completely different from the frail image she had been projecting. "Yes, Maria," she said, "the doctor says I'm fit as a fiddle, but Scott doesn't need to know that. A mother knows best, and that wife of his needs to learn her place." I froze, my heart pounding. Was she faking everything? My hands shook as I quietly recorded her conversation on my phone. This was proof that she had been manipulating us all along. Part of me wanted to confront her right away, but I knew I needed to wait and think this through. Something told me this was just the beginning. A week later, Julie arrived, bringing more luggage than seemed reasonable for someone claiming to stay temporarily. She stood in the lobby, directing Scott like a drill sergeant. "Scott, be careful with those bags," she said. "They're my special china." Scott looked confused. "Mom, I thought this was just for a few weeks, during your renovation." "Well, dear," she replied with a sly smile, "one can never be too prepared." "Oh, Laura," she said, turning to me, "instead of standing there, could you help with the delicate items?" I clenched my teeth. I was in the middle of an important client call, but had to cut it short to avoid a scene. "Coming, Julie," I said, forcing a smile. The next morning, I walked into my home office, ready to start my workday. To my shock, Julie was there, rearranging my furniture. "What are you doing in here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, darling," she said sweetly, "I can't manage those steep stairs with my back condition. The doctor said I need a ground floor space." "This is my office," I said firmly. "I have meetings all day." She ignored me and called out, "Scott, sweetie, could you come here for a moment?" Scott walked in, already dressed for work. "What's wrong, Mom?" "The stairs, dear," she said, clutching her lower back. "My back can't handle them." The doctor was very clear. Scott looked at me hesitantly. "Laura, maybe you could temporarily set up on the covered balcony. It's spacious." "Are you serious?" I asked, feeling my patience slipping away. This was no longer about space. It was about control, and I wasn't going to let her take over my life. I tried to stay calm as I reminded Julie, "I have confidential meetings with clients. Please respect that space." She didn't miss a beat. With a dramatic gasp, Julie clutched her chest and staggered backward as if the stress was too much for her to bear. "Oh, the pressure. I can't breathe," she cried. "Mom," Scott exclaimed, rushing to her side. "Laura, call an ambulance." Julie weakly waved her hand. "No. No ambulance. I just need rest," she said in a frail voice, sinking onto the couch in my office. Scott turned to me with a stern look. "Laura, can't you see how stressed she is? Just let her stay here for a few weeks, please." Feeling outnumbered, I reluctantly moved my equipment to the balcony that evening. Through the glass doors, I watched Julie gleefully rearranging everything in my office as though it was hers. She seemed perfectly fine now, even humming to herself. At 3 a.m., I woke up thirsty and went to the kitchen for water. On my way back, I heard muffled voices coming from the office. Curious, I peeked in and froze. Julie was on the phone talking with someone. "Maria, you wouldn't believe it," she said, laughing softly. "That little princess actually moved to the balcony." "Yes, the balcony. Can you imagine? Phase 1 is complete. Scott always caves when I mention my health. Give it another month, and she'll be out completely." "Oh, and her client list?" "Found it. I've been making some interesting calls." "And her laptop?" "So easy to accidentally spill something on. Soon, she won't even be able to work." My blood ran cold. I hit record on my phone, capturing every word. The next day, I was in the middle of an important video conference when Julie waltzed in, holding my disconnected Ethernet cord. "Oh, dear. Was this important?" she asked, her smile syrupy sweet. "Julie, I was in the middle of," I began, but she cut me off. "Don't take that tone with me," she snapped, clutching her chest again. My nerves can't handle hostility. Later that evening, I discovered my laptop drenched in coffee. Julie was quick to offer an excuse. "Must have been the cleaning lady," she said with a smug smile. From that point on, I locked up my equipment and used a mobile hotspot for my work. But seeing her play the role of the caring mother-in-law while sabotaging my career was unbearable. I knew I needed a better plan. One night, I overheard her in my office again. This time, she was impersonating me on the phone. "Hello, this is Laura Trump," she said in a falsely cheerful voice. "I'd like to cancel all my upcoming contracts." My stomach dropped. She was actively trying to destroy my career. This had gone too far, and I knew it was time to expose her manipulative games. I watched the footage from the hidden camera I had set up in my office. Julie's voice came through clearly. "Yes, terminate everything. Family comes first, you understand," she said with her usual commanding tone. My heart sank as I realized just how far she was willing to go. Determined to uncover more, I started digging into her past. While going through old items, I stumbled across a wedding photo of Scott with another woman. Curious, I did some research and discovered her name was Janice, his ex-wife. I reached out to Janice and we agreed to meet at a quiet coffee shop. She greeted me with a knowing smile. "I never thought I'd hear from Scott's new wife," she said. "Ex-wife. Soon enough," I replied. If Julie has her way. Janice let out a bitter laugh. Let me guess. Health scares, mysterious accidents, and temporary moves that last forever? Yes, I said, nodding. She's also sabotaging my career. She's called my boss, ruined my presentations, and even tried to convince Scott that I'm cheating. Janice's expression turned serious. Did she ever open accounts in your name? Check your credit report. That night, I took her advice and checked my credit. My stomach dropped when I saw the results. 6 new credit cards and 2 personal loans had been opened in my name, all within the last month. My hands shook as I printed out the evidence. Just then, the printer exploded with ink, splattering everywhere. As I stood there in shock, Julie appeared in the doorway. Oh, Laura, she said with a fake gasp, such a shame about your important papers. Don't worry, though. I'm sure you have copies. Her smile faltered when I calmly replied, I do. Lots of them. Later, I overheard her whispering to Scott. I'm worried about Laura, she said in a concerned tone. She's so unstable, always taking pictures, staying up late. Maybe her work is too much for her. The next day, Scott approached me, looking uneasy. Laura, maybe you should take a break. Mom's really worried about your mental health. I raised an eyebrow. Is that what she thinks? I asked, my voice steady. Interesting timing, since her apartment renovation was supposed to be finished weeks ago. She's just concerned, Scott said defensively. Maybe if you were more understanding like Janice. His words hit me, but I kept my composure. I smiled coldly. Janice? Funny you mention her. Did you know your mother drove her away? History repeats itself, Scott. But I'm not Janice. I laid out all the evidence. Fraud, identity theft, and sabotage. Scott stared in disbelief as I explained how Julie had been quietly destroying my career and our relationship. Julie thought she could break me without leaving a trace, but she underestimated me. This wasn't over. It was time for her actions to catch up with her. I was determined to bring Julie's schemes to light. The next morning, my phone rang. Miss Trump, congratulations on landing the Thompson account. The VP position in our Los Angeles office is yours if you want it, said my boss. The timing couldn't have been better. That same morning, I anonymously submitted all the evidence I had gathered to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit and the state's Insurance Fraud Division. It was time for Julie to face the consequences of her actions. At dinner that evening, I decided to deliver the final blow. I looked Julie in the eye and said, I'm moving to Los Angeles for promotion. Scott can stay here with you since you seem to need him so much. Julie sneered, her voice dripping with venom. Running away, are you? I always told Scott you'd abandon him for your career. Scott, sitting between us, looked completely bewildered. Laura, we can talk about this, he said. I stood firm. There's nothing left to discuss. I'm leaving next week. You have until then to decide. Your mother or your marriage. 4 days later, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, 2 agents stood on the doorstep. Mrs. Julie Trump, we have some questions about multiple insurance claims and recent loan applications, one of them said. Julie's face twisted in anger. This is absurd. I've done nothing wrong. The agent held up a stack of documents. Then you won't mind explaining these credit cards opened in Laura Trump's name? Her eyes darted between the agents and me. She did this. Laura opened those accounts. She's framing me. I stepped forward, calm and steady. Really? Then why do we have footage of you making those calls, pretending to be me? And documentation of your previous insurance fraud cases? Julie's voice cracked as she turned to Scott. Tell them, Scott. Tell them your wife is lying. Scott stood frozen, staring at the credit card statements I had forwarded to his phone earlier. His voice was hollow when he finally spoke. Mom, what did you do? Julie's composure crumbled. Everything I did was for you, she cried. She was going to take you away from me. Her words fell flat. Scott didn't say another word. He simply handed the agents his phone, showing them the proof of her actions. As the agents led Julie out of the house, she kept protesting, but it was clear her lies had caught up with her. In that moment, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't experienced in months. The web of manipulation Julie had spun around our lives was finally unraveling. Scott looked at me, his expression a mix of guilt and disbelief. Breaking free wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I had reclaimed my career, my sanity, and my future. Now it was time to start fresh, on my own terms. 2 weeks later, I was on a plane to Los Angeles. Scott kept calling, leaving voicemail after voicemail. "Lara, please." I had no idea. Mom's being charged with multiple felonies. She took out loans in my name too, cleaned out my savings. "Please call me back." Delete. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I should have seen it. Please give me another chance." Delete. 5 months went by. I had just closed a $20 million deal when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Janice, Julie guilty on all charges. 8 years for fraud, identity theft, and financial crimes. Another message followed, this time from Scott. "The divorce papers are signed. I'm in therapy now, trying to deal with everything. I know it's too late, but I finally understand what Mom did. To you. To Janice, to everyone. I'm so sorry." I glanced around my corner office, where awards lined the shelves and the Los Angeles city skyline shone through the windows. This was my fresh start. I was exactly where I was meant to be. "You're missing our team dinner, boss," my assistant said, poking her head into my office. "Be right there," I replied, smiling. Before heading out, I hovered over Scott's message for a moment. Then I deleted it. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. I had no regrets. "Did Alexander pick that amazing Italian place again?" asked my assistant as we left. "You know it," she said, grinning. As we strolled through the vibrant streets of Los Angeles, I felt a wave of contentment. Julie's temporary stay had turned into a permanent one, behind bars in state prison. Sometimes karma really does work flawlessly. I never applied to Scott. My life was better without the toxicity. I had learned to prioritize myself and surround myself with people who respected me. It's funny how toxic people always try to paint themselves as the victims when they finally get caught. Julie had done the same, but the truth caught up with her. What about you? How would you have handled Julie's manipulation? Would you have confronted her immediately or gathered evidence like I did? Some people think I was too harsh on Scott, but when someone consistently chooses their toxic parent over their partner, where do you draw the line? Let me know in the comments. How far would you go to protect your peace? As for me, I've moved on to a life free from drama and manipulation. And honestly, I've never been happier.